Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is the fourth webinar, the fourth video presentation. This is the first webinar of the series and last. We are concluding a series that was started by and sponsored by the Southeastern Nebraska Development District and the Nebraska Economic Developers Association. And this is focused on how important broadband is and how to make sure we get it right in Nebraska. I'm Christopher Mitchell at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Minneapolis, and we work with groups all around the country with a real focus on local government policy, how to make sure everyone has high quality internet access. We're gonna have a very discussion-oriented panel discussion today. We did advertise it as having Julie Bushell from Page Wireless, Jerry Prange, sorry Jerry, I didn't ask you how to pronounce your name. Range, stepping in, and we very much appreciate you coming in from Page Wireless for Julie, who's unable to join us at the last second. Jerry is the Director of Business Development. So we're going to do some short introductions. I'll start with you, and then I'll introduce our other panelists. But can you tell us a little bit about Page Wireless, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Page Wireless is a wholly owned subsidiary of Page Electric, which has been in Nebraska since the early 70s. Page Wireless was launched in March of 2019 and have since built North America's first statewide public LoRaWAN network. LoRaWAN stands for Long Range Wide Area Network. We've traditionally provided wired services throughout the world to many industries, and agriculture is a large portion of that. Our goal was to create the network to foster innovation in the IoT ecosystem and offer affordable connectivity to agriculture and industry. We've done this leveraging entirely private funds and have many success stories in areas such as real-time water monitoring and management, as well as connected farms that are using high-speed wireless for autonomy and education, which allows for real-time decision management ability. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you tell us in your own words, like what sort of stuff do you do that is, because I know that a person might think you're directly running out there and building networks to connect customers in the way that Matt will tell us he does. What sort of stuff does that mean if you just boil it down?
Yeah, so what that means when you talk about real-time water monitoring and management, the IoT, we use devices that are not powered by plugging into an outlet, but small battery powered devices. We monitor real-time water levels down in wells, monitor not only the availability, but the conveyance of that water. So how much water is being used, we may put it on a water meter. Things like weather stations, soil moisture probes, pivot monitors, and the list just goes on and on. But as you can see from this is mostly in rural places where we don't traditionally have connectivity. LoRaWAN, which is an RF protocol, is a very affordable and effective way to get that information where we wouldn't typically be able to get it from by normal services, either wired or otherwise.
Now, when you say that, I think, first of all, RF is radio frequency. And for people that think about this, one of the reasons we wanted to have you here is because you work with so many local ISPs. You really focus on a lot of these devices in the fields, but you're often working with ISPs across Nebraska, right?
Absolutely. The ISPs are a critical component in this. So, communication and data is good as if you can get it from point A to point B. And the ISPs and the fiber providers all play a key role in helping us get that information back in your hands or on your desktop so that you can make those decisions, or to your phone.
Great. Thank you. So now we're going to introduce Brad Moline, who is the president of Allo. Welcome, Brad. Tell us about Allo.
Allo is a broadband company. I really don't call ourselves an ISP because we do so much in the voice and interconnected voice area, internet, and we do intercity, intra-city connections. We're a AWS partner. We're also partnered with Azure and some others. So we like to look at ourselves as another utility, And so we support everything from individual residences to MDUs, apartments, to small businesses, enterprise business, all forms of government. And we're a competitive choice. We're never the incumbent, never have been. We've also never owned an inch of coax or copper. So that's what we are. We're in about, I think it's 16 Nebraska cities now. We serve about 500,000, 550,000 population with inside of city limits. Unlike maybe some of the others on this call, we don't go outside the city limits very much. And 100% of our service and our transport today is fiber, but I try not to say that I'm a fiber company, I'm a broadband company. So I respect the various forms of wireless as well, because to me, it's the right technology for the right place.
You seem like a company that is willing to engage in creative partnerships. There's companies that really don't do partnerships. There's companies that kind of have a straitjacket approach to partnerships. And I feel like you've been more creative along the way.
We have been. One of our we have 4 values. I'm not smart enough to ever remember any type of a mission statement or anything like that. And one of our 4 values is to be local. And so each local entity has their own needs. And so we've had to adapt. At times, Lincoln, Nebraska had 300 miles of conduit through their city. Okay, that made sense for us to use that when we ended up putting in not only that 300 miles, but another 8 million linear feet of conduit. That helped get that deal done. Breckenridge, Colorado is very expensive to build. So we use a little different model there. But in most cases, we use our bank account and our pocketbook and just invest in a community.
I think just for the sake of fun, it's worth noting Breckenridge might be one of the places where you have the least number of days you can build during the year.
Absolutely. And it's also, the network's owned by the city. So we can only go as fast as the city funds provide. And that is completely different for us. Normally in a town of 25,000 or less, we plan on putting a spade in the ground in late February, early March, and being done sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk more about that when we get toward the end in terms of the realities of what it's like to work with different partners and challenges. But first I want to introduce Matt Larson, the CEO of VistaBeam, someone who, if you search around, you can find profiles of Matt solving broadband problems from a long, long time ago. Matt, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Matt Larson from VistaBeam. I've been involved in broadband one way or the other since before there was really broadband, I think going back to 95, and been working with fixed wireless since 1999. And we just, the reason I got into wireless was because we had issues with the copper plant and access to the copper plant, and fixed wireless wasn't great back in the day, but it was what we could use. And we've watched the technologies just incredibly just make huge strides and improve since we started out. We're kind of a hybrid model now. We've started doing a lot of fiber. We've got about 50 miles of our own fiber in the ground now, which is not something I thought we'd be doing very much of, but we're kind of starting to do a little bit more of that and kind of working on more of a hybrid fiber and fixed wireless approach. And we really focus on trying to get to as many people as possible outside of city limits. Obviously, we do cover a lot of towns as well. But the big concern, I grew up 10 miles outside of town. And so I've got a lot of sympathy for people that, weren't able to get anything because they were on the wrong side of the street, or they were a couple of miles outside of the cable footprint. So that's been a big part of our focus. And we started out with 3 towers around Scotts Bluff, and now we're up to 300, and we cover about 40,000 square miles worth of Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado. So it's been an interesting run. we've done a lot of work with local governments and even at the state and federal levels. We're a CAF2 recipient. We also got a little tiny chunk of RDOF that we're working on.
And those are two programs for the Federal Communications Commission.
Two federal programs, right? Sorry, sometimes I start to assume that everybody knows all these crazy acronyms that I have to deal with all the time. Last year, we were a CARES Act recipient from the Nebraska, had a broadband program that used CARES Act money, and we did a huge upgrade on all of our Nebraska network to the point where I think almost all of our Nebraska customers, we can do 100 meg down service. So that was a big jump. We've also run multiple LB840 projects. That's a Nebraska project. I believe Allo has also done some of those as well. But LB840 is a program that cities can use to provide grants for job creation and also do a revolving loan fund. We've done multiple projects with Scottsbluff and Gearing, created jobs. Last year we bought a new facility in Scottsbluff and used some of the LB840 money to add 10 jobs just last year. So those are some of the things that we've been able to do. Our primary focus is out in the western end of the state, obviously, but I think the stuff that we've been doing is there's a good model there for a lot of different places. One of the biggest difference I think with what we can do is, and one of our core values is that we adapt and change, and we try to move fast on different things. We come out, as you mentioned, we get presented with a lot of interesting use case applications where somebody needs to get broadband to an area where it's really difficult to get to, and we come up with solutions to do that. We've gotten solutions into towns that didn't have any other broadband alternatives, and the people that live outside of those towns, and we've been able to do that pretty quickly and pretty efficiently. And I think that's kind of one of our big features that we bring to the table. Also, like working with other good companies. We have a relationship with both Jerry and Brad's companies. Brad's company, Allo, provides our some of our internet backbone and some of our transport, and we host, I don't know, the 20 something of the LoRaWAN base stations for Page Wireless now. That's been great that we could go out and kind of combine with these two guys to go out and really enhance the connectivity options in our areas.
Excellent. Well, we're going to head into the Q&A part where I'm going to start with some questions. We have one question in the Q&A already. I'll actually encourage people to use either the chat or the Q&A. I'll try to manage both, but it might be easier if we keep them in the chat for everyone to see. But you can ask questions throughout. I'll try to work them in, and we'll make sure that we try to tackle all these subjects. But I do want to start off, and I'll direct this to Jerry to start. What is the state of broadband in Nebraska, just from your perspective? Oh, and you're muted. We got our first accidental mute.
There we go. Looking at statistics, as of February of this year, Nebraska lands at number 48 out of 50 on the list of best connected states. So I'm not going to imply anything. I didn't do the study, but that would suggest that we have opportunities to improve, which I believe we do.
Yeah, Matt, how do you? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Jerry. I don't want to cut you off.
Nope, go. You were good.
Yeah, I'd love to just get everyone's perspective on it, and we can talk more about it then.
Yeah, I from my perspective, at least the areas that we're in, I feel like most people have access to good quality service. I think sometimes these studies are put together with the perspective of who's funding the studies, and I don't think that Nebraska's connectivity is 48th. There's a lot of places where we've got, I can say where we're at in Scottsbluff, which is not a big city, and I know for a lot of people it's on the wrong side of the state. We got better connectivity than most of New York City, I think, as far as like being able to get inexpensive, low-cost broadband from multiple providers. And I don't know if that gets factored into a lot of these studies. So yeah, I would say that there's always going to be work to do, but I don't think it's anywhere near as dire as studies that say we're last for broadband. I think that's a little bit of Chicken Little action there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very aware of the study that ranks us 48th, and they use a lot of perceptions. They use a lot of 477 data that's about 10 years old.
And sorry to interrupt for a second. That's just is data from the FCC that there's not a single defender of this data that you could find anywhere.
Yeah,
So.
And so I don't subscribe to that at all. I personally like speedtest.com, which puts us about a middle of the pack. And Allo, we pay attention to that because we care about download speeds, upload speeds, latency. Lincoln, Nebraska is ranked as the number 3 or 4 fastest city of the top 100 cities in the country. And Allo in general is always in the top 10 in the country. In our region, we never can beat Google Fiber out of Kansas City, and it isn't just Google Fiber; it's a combination of Google Fiber and AT&T defending that territory with a huge investment. And so, about 1 in 4, almost 1 in 3 Nebraskans right now can get gigabit service up and down. Just from Allo. And we don't do anything in Omaha. So you throw them out and it's about 50% or 45% of the rest of the state. So it's getting pretty connected. There are some pockets that still have major challenges, but I compete in 3-4 other states, and Nebraska is by far the best connected of the 4. And it's really related to Network Nebraska years and years ago. We've got a lot of middle mile connectivity that most other states don't have.
My sense is that, sorry, Jerry, please go ahead.
I might just quick add, I mean, absolutely agree with Matt and Brad on this as far as in the cities and overall. So studies are studies, and it just, numbers are just what they are. But what we find oftentimes, this isn't the norm out on the farm, and that's where we're working with out in the remote areas. So I completely concur with their observations. That's we're not able to drag fiber behind the tractor, and where we're going out on these farms, we are finding huge pockets of need.
And that's one of the things that we found in talking to Mayor Arganbright of Valentine, which is now connected, but until recently wasn't. And my sense is there's still a fair number of towns, smaller towns often. A lot of the places that have more people are well connected, and then there's a lot of areas I think that are we're still struggling to connect to. So what's the follow-up question though is there a sense that the farms, that the businesses in Nebraska, are we on the right path to make sure they all have the connectivity that they need? And again, and I don't want to, like Matt, I have no doubt that the places that you've connected are well connected, and you can always highlight that if you'd like. But I'd also get the sense of, as a broadband analyst, when you look around, I'll bet you're looking at areas that you're thinking that's going to be, pretty fertile soil for me to build some better connectivity to.
Yeah, I mean, there's always opportunity out there. I do feel like, at least in our area, we've done a pretty good job, and I think there are a few other good fixed wireless operators in Nebraska that maybe don't cover the entire state, but there are definitely some pockets there where the connectivity is really good. I know in our area we've got some bigger farmers that are buying, if they want to have the upload, then we are able to put in, a dedicated system that will get customers the upload that they want. And we have multiple big farm operations that are using that. I think the greater need right now, and the thing that I think gets lost in a lot of this noise, especially about stuff like 5G, like, oh, this is the game changer for everything. It's not a game changer. 5G is just 4G with a different name attached to it. All this talk about what 5G is going to do for Internet of Things and all that, Jerry's network, being able to collect data at small rates, that's way more important for actual application and collection of data and being able to do things than a 5G network is going to be. So it's it's kind of been misused, and I want to make sure to kind of put a little bit of distance between like what fixed wireless operators tend to do and what 5G and the mobile operators do. You know, mobile broadband and mobile connectivity, it's a great thing in certain situations, but we've seen it kind of misused in a lot of places. It's like where it's either being used as a substitute for good landline connectivity or fixed connectivity of some kind. And there are other places where it's kind of being touted as a substitute for cable or even a substitute for fiber. And I don't think that 5G is ever going to accomplish that, despite what the promoters say. So, you know, I do think that there are lots of good applications. You know, if we're looking at the different things, they're kind of different deals. But, you know, Internet of Things is going to be a lot more happy with a low bandwidth, very high range, very high reliability system. Rural low density applications are probably going to work better with fixed wireless, with fiber into feed strategic areas. And then fiber is going to make the most sense in towns and denser areas, and probably eventually can be delivered out to farms as needed. But I don't think that we don't need to have like this huge rush to get fiber to every single farm and outbuilding, you know, in this super short time frame, because it's gonna blow up the cost of building the networks, and it kind of blows up the economics. So it's a very long-winded answer, and I'll leave some room for my compatriots to respond to that.
A lot of good points in there, and that's if Brad, if you don't mind, if you'd respond first to the question about specifically for businesses, and then I'd love to have you respond. Matt made a number of really good points that we'll want to get to.
Well, you know, just a lot of times people think that, you know, with ALLO and our philosophies, we're only in large communities. Our home office where we were founded is a town of 2,000 people. I grew up on a farm 18 miles from here, that Matt provided the service to my dad, and he's had 50 down by 20 up for 4 or 5 years now. Different CAF project, government funded project, brought him fiber after that. But, you know, Matt was fully servicing my dad, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So the town has it, the farmers have it. Wow, that works very well. As far as businesses, you know, there's a variety of businesses in the state, and again, I grew up on a farm, and so I understand the ag side of the business. But then also in town, the reality is, it's the right service for the group or the individual. And the one misnomer, and I'm sure Matt never runs into this, is that it should be really, really cheap for a really, really large application. So in other words, I remember a feedlot that was next to one of our towns said, well, you know, we can't operate without this. And I said, well, we really offer in town the density and all that, but to get out of town, and I think it was 4 miles, I said something like, well, you know, it's going to be $50,000 or $60,000 and it was a large operator. He said, well, I can't afford that. And I said, but you buy a new Suburban every year. As soon as that new Suburban becomes less important to you than connectivity to your feedlot, you're going to get it done. Well, I think Matt took care of him, actually, I think, as well. So, but it's interesting. We also have to set our expectations for the businesses and the operators in society for what is needed. And I think our connections are getting better every day. And again, and then I go on to, you know, we do a lot of voice service. You know, our largest customers, you know, I don't know, I think we do over 9 million minutes of long distance still. There's that side of the business too. So you have to be able to connect people to the rest of the world wherever they're located. I kind of went off script there, but that's all right.
Yes, no, I think that these are valuable perspectives. And Jerry, I want to ask you if you want to weigh in on any of those before I throw another question out.
Yeah, I mean, by and large, most of the communities have some form of connectivity. Is it the best we can do? No, everyone would argue that we could always do better. Whether the cost goes up or not. But what we've really spent a lot of time is the message of connecting acres is equally as important as connecting homes and businesses, as ag represents approximately 30% of our state revenue. So I think we've seen in these last several years that when ag flourishes, our local economies benefit there. So then maybe the last point on that is, you think connecting acres, what could there possibly be out there and to need these higher speeds? There's a tremendous amount of data. Some would argue in terms of petabytes available off of a typical farm in a growing season. So those folks, in order to continue these operations, keep our kids out on the farms, need that connectivity.
And for people who are confused about a petabyte, you can imagine a megabyte, and it's a lot of those. So that's how I would define it. The rescue plan is likely to put a lot of money into local communities. Many of these communities are looking for partnerships, and communities might even be a misnomer. I'm sort of use that generically, but counties, collections of towns that are very low density, they're often looking for some kind of opportunity. So I want to go take two different runs at this. The first one is what you might recommend, where they're likely to be working with a partner that has a good reputation. And the second is, we'll come back to this, so don't get jumped up in right away, will actually be, how do you know if you're dealing with someone that has a good reputation? Because there's a lot of folks that are going to come out and chase this money. So let's start off, and I'll start with you, Brad, this time. What, when you're, advising cities that say, what do we got to do to partner with you? What do you tell them?
Be honest. Be honest with what your strengths and weaknesses are. And another is invest in, for us, it's invest in GIS. If you don't have your spatial data for your community, the demand right now is so high from all these communities across the country that if you don't have spatial data, we almost can't work with you. Almost is a bad term because whether it was Valentine or others, we've made exceptions. But the that's an important thing to invest in. So if you want fiber, somebody's going to have to do the design. They don't want to go out and kind of do it the old-fashioned way and with a paper and pencil. I know nobody uses that, but with CAD or something like that. Everything's done with GIS. That's important. But then also,
Sorry,
be honest.
Before you go beyond that, are you looking at parcel data? Like what kind of spatial data in particular is valuable?
Curbs, streets, utilities, the power system. Nebraska has 100% municipal power or public owned power. So Nebraska is an easier state to get things done than most, in my opinion. Quite often, some of the for-profit power companies have different rules and create roadblocks that we deal with in other states. And then, be reasonable. Let's figure out the safest way to put it in. That's the most important, and efficient. Some communities, you don't see this as much in Nebraska as other places. Again, the second you get started and you say, hey, I'm going to invest 20 million in your town. And the first thing that they turn around and say is, and then we want this free and this free and this free and this free. And then we go, okay, we can provide all that, but we're going to have to charge your community more. Oh, in other words, figure out what's important to you and not, and get it done. And then one thing that I think we should do better is work with the other companies so that we not only handle the city limits, but we handle the next most populous area. You know, we work a lot with the fixed wireless group and the people on this call, but I think we could be better partners than we are as Allo. And so, you know, define your needs and define as a city where you want to go. Now, on a county level, it's a whole different game because we use hardly any government funds. We've invested a little over 400 million in fiber networks, and we plan to invest at least that much more. So we've got that side. But as we start spreading out to the county, then we've got to get a little more creative. We need to define what is your real need. Where do you want to take fiber to? Where do you want to take fixed wireless? What are the holes in that plan? But most importantly, does it meet the needs and is it cost efficient? Everybody will say, oh, well, you know, we'd like fiber to this area 33 miles from town, that there's a density of 1 home for every 6 miles. Well, that's neat and everything, but I don't think society should fund that. And so I think we should find a better option there. Wireless, you know, a variety of other solutions, fiber with another. And that's how I look at the world.
Thank you, Brad. Jerry, would you like to go next in terms of that question?
Sure. I mean, a lot of good points Brad made, but kind of starts with reach out to us with just a genuine desire to address the problem now. Be prepared to come to the table with very important community support that presents the needs not only of the immediate community, but the people around your community, because they help keep these local communities thriving, and versus settling for what's available, because this is all we know. So ask the questions, bring that desire. We want to find a way to say yes and not no, because the technology really is the easy part. It's around and it's always going to be here and improve, but you know, we'll find ways to be creative and make these things work.
And Matt, one of the things I've always enjoyed about you is that you're very collaborative. whether it's a town or whether it's another business asking you advice. And so I'm curious how you deal with this.
So I would echo a lot of what Brad said. You know, I think towns having their expectations normalized is good. Expecting to turn pole attachments into a revenue source, that can be problematic. I think any provider wants to pay their fair share, but not be gouged.
Let's come back to that in a second. I think that's a really important point, but go ahead and finish.
The other part of that, I think, is also, you know, the make-ready issues with poles. That's a big thing that I think has crippled many a fiber project in different places where the poles were either overloaded or just in poor shape and needed a lot of work. So that's one of the things that I think affects stuff on the fiber side. On the fixed wireless side, I think it's really important to have that fixed wireless umbrella out there, because it takes a long time to build landline networks. And having that umbrella where you can get people on immediately that have needs, that was huge last year. We saw tremendous demand in a lot of places where we didn't expect it, because the other facilities there could not keep up with what people were trying to do, especially places where there was just DSL or kind of substandard cable. So being able to have an alternative out there is important. To echo the GIS, also maybe an outline of available resources, whether that's water tanks, existing communication towers, hilltops, even just real estate like fire stations. We're working on a project in Wyoming where a bunch of fire stations all wanted better communications. And so we worked out a deal to put towers up at the stations for their communications and for us to be able to distribute in the local area. And one thing and maybe we'll touch on this later, but not a really good map of where fiber is available necessarily in a lot of places. I know if I'm not working with a couple of good providers, Allo is one of them, they'll give us pretty good information on where the fiber's at. We can generally build wireless to where the fiber's at, but there's a lot of places where it's not very well documented what is actually out there. and the pricing can get really out of whack in Nebraska. We've got lots of middle mile fiber, but a lot of it is not priced appropriately. So I would just say that is one of the weaknesses in Nebraska is the middle mile tends to be a lot more expensive than we see in Wyoming and Colorado, for example.
Regarding the polls, I think this audience may not be as familiar with how the process works. You described make ready, which is the process of making sure that there is a space on the pole that allows a new cable to be attached safely. And then you also mentioned the rents. Do you have are there any guidelines or any places that you would point people to make sure that they are engaging in good practice with regard to welcoming communications providers on their poles?
I'll let Brett answer that because most of the fiber we've done has been underground. We have just a little bit of pole attachment, and but I think Brad's probably got a lot better perspective on that than I do.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The real challenge is on the poles. Generally, we can get the rents so that they're reasonable, but quite often antiquated valuations of what a fiber strand is going to add to the weight is just not logical. The electric utilities quite often are thinking, oh, this is like a copper system where the pounds per foot is rather high, the diameters are high, so that if ice begins to build up, it'll cause weights. But in the end, as I mentioned earlier, this is a 100% municipal owned or at least government or pseudo government owned.
Accountable to the people.
Yeah. Electric utility. And what quite often, and again, I deal with cities, the cities need to say, hey, the next guy, the fourth guy on the pole shouldn't have to clean up the mess of the previous three. And so there was a town in Colorado that we overbuilt, and they did a great job. They just went through and cleaned up the poles before we ever got there. It went very smooth. Not a single complaint that I'm aware of from the other communications providers or the electric utility. It was neat and clean, and people got fiber and got gigabit or soon 10 gig to the home connectivity very quickly. And if I could just map that for the future, that would be awesome. But quite often it becomes a situation where well-meaning people become obstructionists, either because they haven't paid attention to their poles for the past 10 years, or they're not fully understanding that this loading just won't matter because it's so light. But anyway,
I think there's a lot of people who are either watching this now or watching this in the future thinking, I didn't realize that poles are that interesting. And I assure you, we are only scratching the surface of how important this stuff is.
Yeah, the simple answer is going underground versus aerial. Underground's about 2.5 to 3 times as expensive. And so, and it takes a little more time. You can go about twice as fast aerially. So if you think about it, it's more both cost efficient and more time efficient. And so that's why people get very interested in it. Now, while I say that, I will tell you, we've done a ton of aerial work in Nebraska, and most communities that we've worked with, of course, that's a barrier. So if you can't cross that barrier, you never work with that community. But most communities have done a nice job in the end and become great partners, because in the end, we're just another utility. We're nothing more, nothing less. After it gets built, we're taking care of our asset. We're locating, we're doing all the same things as water, sewer, the other communications, utilities, electric. And that's all we are, is a competitive utility.
When you mentioned that, I think it's worth noting that it is tradition in law, I think that the new attacher generally pays. And this is just a really great way of making it hard to get new entities around. So I don't want to spend more time on that, but I do want to note it's not like Nebraska decided that. And I know you weren't alleging that. Matt, I'm curious about one other thing about what cities can do. I feel it's particularly for smaller providers. Having a permitting system that's predictable is probably more important than it being either cheap or fast. And I'm curious if you would challenge that. The idea that if you can schedule something, you prefer that to an unpredictable, even if it's perhaps much cheaper. But tell me how you weigh those sort of issues as you're getting permission to be in the rights of way and working around towns.
Well, we don't do a lot of fiber, and my experience with permitting is limited. I can say that I don't like it very much because one of the big appeals of fixed wireless is we're basically a giant regulatory bypass in a lot of ways. So the permitting process is time that we could be building. And so a lot of the stuff that we've done is we've gone in and gone ahead and built out with wireless, and we'll let the permitting deal sort itself out later. But if there is a permitting roadblock, that's definitely a factor of I'm not going to go that direction if I don't have to. And some interesting things have started coming up, certain places where it looks like we're going to have a permitting issue. Like the railroads are legendary for sitting on permits forever if you want to go under a railroad. And one of the things we've been working with is, we've got kind of short range microwave backhauls that can do 5 to 10 gig in capacity. And we're starting to look at places where we can do fiber for the last mile, but we're going to feed it with wireless because it's got enough capacity to feed an area. So, I look at permitting as kind of a necessary evil. Getting the right of way is kind of a necessary evil if you want to do fiber. But I do not wait around for permits. If there's a demand out there and ways that we can work around it, we will do that if we have to. And even on the pole attachment situation, I know that there's a couple of towns that we're working with in other places outside of Nebraska where getting on the poles is going to be difficult or impossible because another provider locked it up. So we're working on deals to get on streetlights, and we can do millimeter wave fixed wireless off of streetlights. It's, the economics work in some places. We generally have to start with business districts and then work our way out into residential neighborhoods if it makes sense. But there are other ways to skin that cat if you have to get service out to people.
Jerry, I wanted to ask you about something Matt had said earlier regarding the middle mile being challenging in Nebraska, particularly compared to other states. And for folks who aren't totally familiar, the middle mile is sort of that part of the network that gets you to a town, and then you can distribute your signal within the town. So Jerry, what has your experience been with middle mile in Nebraska?
They're absolutely necessary for us to get out to the rural areas. So, by working with the wireless providers or fiber providers, we've seen some instances where, as Matt talked, it's been cost prohibitive. I don't know about prohibitive, but it certainly gets our attention to where we may have to think a little bit differently. But that middle mile, if we're going to get connectivity out to these areas to that last mile, we've got to depend on them to deliver those services.
And that's one of the things that we did talk about in a previous episode of this was about the Nebraska restrictions, and in particular how it prevented some of the cooperatives and other public power providers from stepping in to perhaps solve that issue. Even if they're not going to provide service to homes, that they would be able to better provide that middle mile access. Is that something, I feel like you've worked maybe with other states where they allow this and it's a little bit easier?
Yeah, and I may use an example of public power. Custer Public Power has been a great partner with us. While they don't offer internet service, they've been tremendous to work with, not only helping to build up their service area, the customers access in their service area, but helping us to get to places where we can bring those additional services to their farms and to their rural homes.
Thanks. Matt and Brad, are there things, whether it's that or other government policy at the state level, that you'd recommend changing?
I don't get that wound up about being able to offer the service or whatever. Well, like Matt said, you figure out the lay of the land and then you work with or around things. The reality is, where all the expense is in fiber, or our side of the connectivity, is in the conduit or the strand wire. So
I'm going to say what strand wire is quick.
Basically, that's the wire that goes between the poles inside of well, not anywhere. And then the fiber's actually lashed to it. If I was a city and you wanted to get involved in it, or I was a power company and you wanted to get involved in it, don't invest in fiber, invest in conduit and strand wire. The fiber side is the inexpensive side of the whole operation. So rather than getting all wound up about changing the law, just invest in what you can. You can lease that wire for whatever you want. You can lease the conduit for whatever you want. Well, as long as it's less expensive than me installing it myself, or I guess neutral. And so that's my opinion in Nebraska. The rules were created. It takes a long time to change the rules. So work within them, and providers like us, we can play the game if necessary. If a public power company wants to lease this conduit, we do it all day long, because that is our barrier to most communities. And I'm going to go back on a previous question, permitting. We've had some of our communities that we've constructed in that have approved the permitting for 5,000 and 10,000 homes at once. It's just, we give them the plan, we go through it. It's an active process. But some of these Nebraska towns and Colorado towns that we've worked with have been very professional and created a very safe result. And those are the best. Is get the bureaucracy out of the way, but maintain safety and quality of your environment, and let it roll. And then you can allow us to invest a lot of money in your community, and we'll take care of that community.
Matt, I feel like we almost missed the pun there with Brad talking about getting wound up about overlashing. But how do you react to the question about state policy?
Well, I don't know if the state policy, I think, restricted the primary one was the inability for Nebraska Public Power to be able to lease fiber capacity. And I think having that on the market would have been great. I think we would have been able, I know we would have been able to use that for middle mile a lot earlier, but I don't think they can do it. But you also brought up cooperatives, and I know you're a big proponent of cooperatives, but I think in this situation, cooperatives are part of the problem, because I think a lot of the cooperatives are more focused on maintaining their monopoly status and trying to keep competitors out, and don't fully take advantage of the opportunity to work with another partner that can figure out other ways to get in and compete with them if they don't want to work with them. And that's where I've run into, I think, the biggest issues are cooperatives that have either priced themselves out of the market, or because they know that they can. It's also affected the ability to get capital, which is a completely different story, but working with RUS and a lot of other big government entities, it's impossible to get funding in certain areas because the cooperatives have the lock on it. So I don't really see cooperatives in quite the beneficial light that you do. And I see them as being part of the problem in some situations. Now, that's not to say they're all bad. I'm just saying that in a lot of the places where we've seen issues, it's been to deal with, it's been small telephones and cooperatives in a lot of cases.
And for people who are interested, I have no doubt that Matt and I will take this up again in a future discussion. And I've always found that Matt has convinced me of something in our discussion. So when we get together and debate, it's usually pretty entertaining. I do want to come back to something. Jerry, go ahead and say what you're going to say, and then I have a question. And let me, before you do that, Jerry, anyone else has questions to throw in the chat, please don't forget to do that. Jerry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, as far as the Nebraska and getting hands, whether it's the politics of getting things through, but the message or things that I would like to say is really get this, whatever monies that are coming out, get it in the hands of Nebraska folks that are here, vested in our communities, and that can deliver in a way that is meaningful to not only the communities. Invest in Nebraska companies. We live here. These are our friends and neighbors. So let's not wait 5 to 10 years, for things to play out. I think we can do things in a much quicker pace than what we may have in these areas that might be underserved or no service.
That's actually a very good lead into the last question, which is one I asked earlier and then never followed up on, which is there's a lot of companies and consultants coming out right now to chase this money. And I sometimes think consultants get a bad rap when I've certainly seen a broad range of folks that are really good to folks that are clearly predatory. I'm afraid that, like Brood X dominating the news on the East Coast with the cicadas coming out, that we are going to see a lot of predatory type consultants and others peddling hardware to communities that have money to spend on broadband. And I'm curious what advice that you have, and I'll start with you, Brad. What advice do you have for communities to make sure that they're doing the due diligence before they're hopping into bed with someone that comes with a great solution to them?
Well, I'm a broadband proponent. So what I usually tell when I meet with a community is I said, why'd you invite me here? Well, because we don't have sufficient broadband. Okay. Do you have power? Yes. Do you have sewer? Yes. Can you only flush one toilet and you can't, run your dishwasher at the same time? No. Okay, you need broadband. So don't do a study on demand. You need it, or you wouldn't have asked me here. Put that risk on me. I'll determine, whether I need to go, but don't spend a lot of money doing studies on how much need there is and all that. There is one. And I won't mention the name of the town, but RUS back, 15 years ago, required us to do a demand study. And in this one community, 75% of the people that we surveyed said they were generally satisfied with their current provider. We have a 75% market share today. We overbuild it anyway. That study meant nothing to me because I knew and I could see, and I talked to the business leaders of that community. So don't waste your money on studies. You need it. It's like electricity. Spend your money on having your consultants help you prep your market for bandwidth. Have it be an actual product, not, I guess if you've lived in a cocoon for the past year, particularly, you could say, well, maybe my community doesn't need broadband. Maybe my kids don't need to learn. Maybe my farmers don't need to be progressive. Maybe my businesses don't need to conduct business on an international or national stage. If you say yes to any of those, you're a unique community. So don't spend $100,000 on that. Spend $100,000 trying to actually get something ready to be productive, creating space on water towers. What Page does. I'm still convinced. If I have to hear one more time about a self-driving truck or car, I would much rather have Laura handle a self-driving tractor where there's no people around. Oh my gosh, can you imagine the work we could do and how wonderful this would be? But anyway, don't waste your money on studies is what I'm trying to say. Everybody needs it. And then how do you pick a good provider? Staying power. I mean, I'm old in this industry. You know, I say, hey, I've been around a quarter century. I'm just glad Matt's been at it longer than I have. The new guy with an idea and is always somebody to look at and support. But you got to have capital. You have to have business processes, and you should have at least some sort of a success in track record. Those are the people you want to get behind. You know, I had day one in this industry as well, but I had 7 years before me in proving out models and capital and staying power. So
Excellent.
that's one of the ways. And God bless Jerry. Work with people in your own backyard who have been there. You know, quite often you can't be an expert unless you're at least 100 miles away. So,
which will often still put you in Nebraska at least.
Absolutely.
So we have a minute or two left. So Jerry and Matt, what would you add on to that? Jerry, you go first.
People get tired of hearing this, but like I said, it's really about we're taking care of our friends and neighbors. Work with our folks. Brad made a lot of great points. Is we've got a tremendous amount of resources. Have been so fortunate to have what we have here in the Midwest, and this last year has really shown a light on a lot of those opportunities and nice things that we have. Focus on, Brad said, the staying power, those that are going to be here, not here today, gone tomorrow type things, because oftentimes, that customer service goes with it. The things that are important, the relationships in the services that we procure or purchase from others.
Thank you. And the last word, unless I don't like it, then I'll just start talking after you're done, Matt.
All right, so I've got a great example for this. I'm going to use example Walden, Colorado. We had one of our former customers move to Walden. They had bad broadband. The fellow got involved. He was a county commissioner, and they had money set aside for a study. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do a study for you. And I generated all the statistics and wrote up a document, gave a presentation, and it was $25,000 study. And I took all of that and used it to build our first microwave connection into that area. After that, we got letters of support from them, and we ended up getting a grant from the state of Colorado Broadband Fund to help build out better broadband in that county. We also used that information to help participate in CAF2. We were a successful CAF2 bidder in that area. And that was because the people in that county, they didn't have to spend, they did spend the money to do the initial study, but that was kind of a requirement that everybody has to do these studies. But we took that money and used it as economic incentive to build out. And we needed to, because it's not a very big population. It's a town of 600 people in a very sparsely populated county. So I think it just goes to show it's not necessarily a money thing. It's just throwing your support, offering resources, and helping a provider find, work with your local entity, the city or the county or whatever, identify your weak spots, work with the provider to get the weak spots addressed, and offer what you can. It's not always about money. Actually, the participation and the right of way, and making it easy to do, making your area easy to do business with, is the best way to get broadband in.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you to the Southeast Nebraska Development District and the Nebraska Economic Development Association. We very much appreciate the ability to speak about broadband over these 4 sessions. I've really enjoyed capping it off with this discussion. So thank you very much. This will be available and distributed by those organizations.